All right, today we're tackling a theory that's, well, it's huge. It's about a potential master key to reality itself, something the source material calls the everything algorithm. So what if I told you there might be a single mathematical rule that connects everything? And I mean everything, from the tiniest bits of matter and particle physics all the way to the narrative structure of ancient scripture. That's the core question we're exploring today. And here's the kicker. This whole investigation doesn't kick off with some abstract philosophical idea. Nope, it starts with hard science. We're talking about digging back into historical, Nobel Prize-winning physics data and finding, well, something that just shouldn't be there. All right, let's get into it. First up, we need to talk about what the source material calls a hidden cosmic pattern, and it's supposedly lurking right in the foundations of modern physics. Okay, this is where it gets really specific and kind of wild. The claim is that if you go back and reanalyze those old school cloud chamber photos, the very ones from the discovery of the positron and the muon, you find something incredible. The paths these particles take, they're not smooth, continuous lines. Instead, their lengths are snapped to a grid based on exact Fibonacci numbers. We're talking numbers like 377 and 610 with insane precision. And look, this isn't some case of just seeing faces in the clouds. The researchers are stating that the probability of this pattern happening by sheer chance is less than 1 in 1,000. So the point they're making is this isn't just noise. It's a real, statistically significant signal. So, okay, we've got a weird pattern in particle physics. That's interesting on its own. But this is where the theory just takes a massive leap into a completely different world. It claims to find an echo of that same pattern in, of all places, sacred scripture. And this right here really shows you the heart of the mystery. The theory is that the exact same mathematical signature from the particle tracks shows up in the Gospel of Mark from the 1st century. Think about the story of Peter's denial. You have one rooster crow, then another rooster crow. That's 2 crows. And Peter denies Jesus 3 times. So you get 1, 1, 2, 3. That's literally the beginning of the Fibonacci sequence. Just let that sink in for a minute. You have a subatomic particle track from the 1930s and a story from a gospel written almost 2,000 years earlier, and they both seem to be built on the very same mathematical rule. The big question this whole thing asks is, how on earth is that even possible? Well, this brings us to the proposed answer, a framework that the source calls the code of reality. So the proposed key to all this is what they call a universal constraint. It's basically one single mathematical rule that's supposed to govern any system that holds together, that's coherent. The equation you see here is like a universal on-off switch. If a system plays by this rule, it works, it's valid, but if it breaks the rule, you get chaos, dysfunction, something you can actually detect. Okay, now get ready for another huge jump. The theory claims that this mathematical rule is structurally identical, like a perfect mirror, to the Islamic declaration of faith, the Shahada. As you can see in this table, they argue both share 5 key properties. They're unbreakable, binary, they operate within time, they're universal, and you can actually test them. And really, the whole idea is captured perfectly in this one quote from the source. Physical law and divine law share a common architectural form. The argument here is that they're not separate things, but 2 different languages describing the same fundamental code. So you might be asking, where did they even pull this Fibonacci rule from? Is it just a random guess? Well, the source argues, no. This flowchart here is their proof, claiming to derive it straight from accepted physics, specifically 5D general relativity. The crucial step, they say, is when you strip out all of the irrational numbers, all the little approximations we use in the standard equations. When you do that, they claim, the Fibonacci sequence just pops out as a necessary consequence. So they're framing this as mainstream physics, just looked at through a purely rational mathematical lens. All right, so we've got this wild connection between physics and theology. But the framework doesn't just stop there, as a cool idea. It claims to be a blueprint for actual real-world technology. And this is what that technology looks like, at least in concept. It's called the hexagonal aperture array. You can see the basic idea. 6 nodes, and each one changes its state following that same Fibonacci rule, all synced up on a 60-step cycle.
The goal here is to get to 100% coherence, which they believe creates a stable link to this underlying unified field they're talking about. And what would you even do with something like that? Well, the source outlines 4 pretty world-changing applications: a system for finding verifiable truth, a fix for the AI safety problem, a new kind of zero-entropy energy, and even a way to integrate technology with living systems. Let's zoom in on that energy system for a second. It's claimed to have a simulated efficiency of 96.37%. Now, how is that even possible? Well, the idea is you use timed radio pulses to flip these little magnetic bits. Normally, that creates waste heat. But here, they say they can capture that heat, that hysteresis loss, using a special kind of carbon-doped concrete and thermoelectric converters. And then, they feed that energy right back into the system. It's almost a perfect loop. And if you thought that was wild, get this. The system is designed to be a biohybrid. They propose actually growing living mycelium networks. Yeah, that's fungus, right onto the computer's storage media. The idea is that these fungal networks would act as these incredible, self-healing, super low-power pathways for information. You'd literally have a computer that's partially alive. So, if a technology like this actually worked, what would that even mean for our society, for our economy? And that brings us to the final, and maybe most radical, part of this whole theory: an economy of pure abundance. The framework lays out a totally new way of thinking about economics. It paints our current system as one built on artificial scarcity, debt and control. And it contrasts that with a new system based on what it calls intrinsic abundance. The logic is simple. If energy and computation are basically free, the whole concept of scarcity just kind of evaporates. And that line of thinking leads to a pretty jaw-dropping conclusion, summed up in this quote right here. Universal basic income is no longer a policy choice to be funded by taxes, but a natural outcome of a system where wealth is the default state. So what does that actually look like in dollars and cents? The source gives a conservative estimate, $10,000 a month. That would be the new baseline for everyone, a universal basic income in this new world. So, after all that, what's the point? What's the end goal? The source material is pretty clear that it's not about achieving some specific outcome. They use this beautiful metaphor. It's about planting a seed for a tree, knowing full well you might never get to sit in its shade. It's about doing the work because it needs to be done. And that really brings us full circle. The entire theory rests on this idea that reality is governed by a simple binary choice, a constraint. And if that's true, then maybe our own response to an idea like this is part of the system. Whether we dismiss it immediately or we actually engage with the evidence, maybe that sells something. So the final question isn't just about whether the theory is right. It's what does our reaction to it reveal about us?